I may have this is what we I've worked from home. I work from home. So I just.
Okay, that's
Okay, guys, we're going to get started now.
We're going to go ahead and start the meeting, please.
Thank everybody for coming. There is a sign-up sheet in the back. If you haven't had a chance, if you wouldn't mind sharing your contact information on the sign-up sheet. That way we can make sure to give you all the updated information. And there is an agenda back there. Start with introductions for anybody new. I'll just go around the table again. I'm Max Middendorf with Nico Engineering.
Bob Mans with Hennigan and Associates.
Al Davenport, Jersey County Rural Water.
Cindy Campbell, City of Carlinville.
Greg Bates, Manager, Jersey County Rural Water.
Steve Rupert, Representative for Foster Township Water.
Mark Bumard, District Manager, Fosterburg Water.
Matt Turley.
Director of Public Works for the City of Carrollton.
Tim Sarah, City of Carlinville.
Susie Campbell, Village of Dorchester.
Deanna Tunizio, City of Carlinville.
Brian Mitchell, City of Carlinville.
Beth Jones, Carlinville.
Camille Brodsey, City of Carlinville.
Sherry Brianza, Carlinville.
Oh, Matt Turley, Carlinville.
Kirk Allen.
John Kraft.
Scott Reichman.
Carl Starr.
Steve Barr. Randy Briskovich, Bunker Hill.
Betty Phelps, Butler Hill.
Fritz Allen, Fosterburg Water.
Caleb Collins, City of Bunker Hill.
I'm David Foreman, Foreman Kessler.
Can I say something? Rich Allen is our last founding member of Fosterburg Water. 50 years.
Okay, Bob sent out a copy of the minutes from the last meeting. Is there any discussion on those minutes? Okay, consider a motion to approve.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All in favor? Those opposed, same sign.
Okay, we've got this part of our agenda. We were going to open it up to guests and public comments. So I'd like just show of hands, anybody that's got any questions or input? It's not on the agenda. Yes.
Yeah, my name's Kirk Allen. I'm just curious, as far as the makeup of this board, how did this board come about, and are you guys a public body?
That's a good question. Right now, if you'll look on the agenda, there is discussion as to the organizational structure. So they have not formally organized the charter for the board. They're looking at organizational options, so that is to be selected yet.
Well, when you say they, who are you talking
The
about?
voting members for each of the participants.
And that, I guess that's my point, is how did you folks become to be at the table?
Well, we started this venture with the Water District. Right now, there's 3 entities that are involved in this, that put up some seed money to show interest into this. So each district that showed an interest in this has selected one person as a representative from that board. If there'd be more people put more money, put their money in a kitty to join, they can have a representative up there as well.
Okay, and as far as those interested, you said there were 3 that put seed money
Yeah.
in? Were those 3 public bodies?
Fosterburg Water,
Jersey County Rural Water is a private entity.
Okay, so a private, and what about the other 2? Are they private or public?
Fosterburg would be public, and so would Carlinville, I'm sure.
All right, thank you.
Any other public comments? Okay. Next on the agenda, we have David Foreman, who's the attorney for Gateway Water Company, and he's going to talk to us about how Gateway is organized, what that structure looks like.
Well, thank you for inviting me here.
My name's David Foreman. I'm an attorney from Salem, Illinois. I practice primarily in oil and gas, but several years ago I became involved in, I represent several rural water companies, not-for-profit corporations, and I became involved in gateway. And as that entity has evolved, we gained certain experience. It was, I think, about the first such venture in the state, taking a regional approach to water supply. And as I'm sure, I'm going to share with you kind of our experiences, and then hopefully perhaps answer some questions you have about what your options are, how you can structure your organization, what certain advantages or disadvantages might be of different choices and so forth. But the underlying premise of all this, as I'm sure you probably shared, is that with rural development, it's taking a more regional approach to water treatment to achieve economy of scale. It just doesn't make sense to plow money into multiple water treatment facilities when you can have one treatment facility that can serve several members or customers. And as most rural water companies or small municipalities often find out, they get their water, they're a satellite. They're either purchasing their water from the municipality, and they are essentially held hostage. I mean, that's a bit of an overstatement, but contractually speaking, you're essentially at their mercy. You don't have any voting power. None of your residents live within the voting district. You're kind of the stepchild, so to speak, and you don't really have any say on what rates they charge. There's usually some arcane formula built into your water purchase contract that you have to pour over to try and figure out what costs are being shoehorned into this versus what one shouldn't, how overhead is split, so forth and so on. Point being, a lot of these satellite communities find these relationships unsatisfactory. And at some point in time, you get to a point where you say, is there another way? Lots of these municipalities are facing having to upsize, build new plants, so forth and so on. With that construction, with that capital expenditure is going to come an increase in rates. So as we try and modernize the potable water treatment process moving forward, this regional model has developed. And what you see is you have a kind of a coming together of rural water companies, water districts, and small municipalities to kind of band together in a cooperative effort to control their own destiny, to create their own supplier, and to have some sort of voice or say in how this develops. Budgeting, cost, rates, so forth and so on. And so what you wind up with is you're at a kind of a seminal stage here, is you have a service area that kind of evolves with municipalities and groups within that service area that you intend to serve. And you would like to bring as many municipalities on board, as many customers and districts as you can within that area, because one of the whole premises of this is that you have a certain amount of fixed costs that you're going to invest. And then you have variable costs. But your fixed costs are sunk, so that to the extent that you can increase usage, you can increase sales, you can spread that fixed cost over a larger volume, you can save money, you can keep your rates down. Okay, the objective of most of these efforts is to figure out a way to secure a stable, steady, secure source of water for an extended period of time at a reasonable rate. And you know, that doesn't mean it's free. That doesn't mean it's the cheapest. It might not be by the time you build everything. But you have control over it. That's kind of one of the main points in all of this is you set up an organizational structure, which in my particular case, I'll give you as the gateway example. What we have is essentially a co-op of co-ops. And we have member water districts, rural water companies, which are not-for-profit companies. We have villages and municipalities, which are municipal corporations. Now, we have an entity that's named a water district, but in fact, it's a not-for-profit corporation. But you also have water districts and a water district act. You have a way of these entities essentially joining together, being a co-op. Now, the rural water companies, you're familiar with the cooperative concept. Okay, every member is an owner. You're a customer, but you're an owner. And there isn't any owner's equity in a co-op. Your savings go, they may go to the bottom line, and there may be a line item there on your financial statements, but the idea of a co-op is to obtain whatever service you're providing at the lowest reasonable price, and if you have surplus money left over, usually is not the case, but it can get distributed back to your members. The cooperative model is very popular in utilities, water and power. And a lot of you are probably familiar with how it works in the rural power circumstance. You get credits back and so forth and so on. So essentially you take that same model, that same not-for-profit corporation, and you elevate it. So now we have the umbrella. We have in our case, a not-for-profit corporation that is the regional supplier. And then the rural water companies, rural water districts, and municipalities are members of that not-for-profit corporation. And you can, as far as your organizational structures concerned, a not-for-profit corporation is kind of a half-breed. It's a quasi-public entity, which means it's not a public entity. It's organized under the Illinois Not-for-Profit Business Corporations Act. It's not a unit of local government. However, these things have evolved in areas where government has left a vacuum, namely the provision of utilities. So there's not a lot of governmental entities chomping at the bit to go out there and lay water line in rural areas. So these not-for-profit corporations have evolved to fill that need. So you are a not-for-profit corporation, unlike a regular for-profit corporation. You don't have shareholders, you don't have dividends, you don't have those sorts of things, but you are organized as a corporation through the Illinois Secretary of State. You function the same way through a board of directors. You are not a public entity, so you're not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. You're not subject to the Open Meetings Act. Okay, but some of your members might be public entities, and they are subject to the Freedom of Information Act and the Open Meetings Act. So with respect to the regional entity, you're not a public entity. But if you have any of your members still have to abide by the Open Meetings Act as far as getting a majority of a quorum together, because that would constitute a public meeting. So you've got to be careful to make sure that you don't have a meeting like this where you have a majority of a quorum from a municipal council present without notifying or noticing it up as a public meeting. So the entity is not a public entity, but if you have municipalities that are, they still have to comply. Now, it's generally not a problem because you're not sending 3 and 4 people to a meeting. But when you're first getting started, you may have multiple people from one entity present. And as long as they're not council members, it's not a fact. As far as kind of what the entity is and how it works, organizationally, as I said, you have articles of organization. That's your bylaws, your articles of incorporation. File those with the Illinois Secretary of State. That's what gets the ball rolling. And then you have bylaws. And bylaws are essentially the agreement amongst the members as to how the organization is going to function, what its mission is, what it's going to do, how it's structured, so forth and so on. And then you can have in there your rules, rates, and regulations kind of built into that. Now, what these entities can have any type of structure that you choose. You can have tiered membership or different types of members, full members versus non-voting members, or you could have a customer who's a bulk purchaser who's not a member at all. Now, in our experience, what we have done is we've had multiple entities consisting of rural water companies, municipalities, that are, it's kind of one member, one vote. It doesn't have to be that way. You can have weighted voting. You can have voting that is weighted upon usage. You can have voting that's weighted upon any number of things. In our example, the one member, one vote, regardless of, you may have be the biggest member, you may be the smallest member. We have not had any difficulty with any lack of cooperation, but the key to this is that you have to, every entity that chooses to be a member has to understand and accept the responsibility of membership, which is first and foremost cooperation. It's not up to any single entity's agenda as to how to approach this. These entities succeed for one reason only, and that is cooperation and teamwork amongst the constituent members. If you do not have that, it will not succeed. If you have one entity that's driving an organization another way and pitting itself against another entity, it will not work. In my experience, I have not had problems with that. I have seen water companies that have had those problems within it. I've seen boards fractured and split. I've seen problems develop. I've not seen it develop at this level. And one of the reasons why is because it's in everybody's own self-interest to cooperate. You simply set the thing up in a way in which everybody's own self-interest is served by cooperating with everyone else. That way you avoid a lot of problems. And in my experience, there has been a great deal of cooperation. But I would say that is the touchstone, first and foremost, kind of that you have to build a steering committee at this point moving forward. There's a certain amount of irony here in that most of you are probably wanting to seek some sort of independence from a captive supplier. You can only do that by banding together. Okay, so you have to try to maintain your own autonomy, but you have to cooperate in order to get it. So you have to surrender a little bit to get a whole lot. And you have to be willing to be a part of that cooperative effort, and you have to be able to trust the other people around the table to do likewise. If you have those things, then it will succeed. It has been a very flexible and handy model. One of the guiding principles that we have maintained is an equality or amongst all of our members. As I said, we have one member, one vote, regardless. Now, treating everybody the same is easy to say, sometimes it's difficult to do because the circumstances can change. Different members can be situated differently. So it's not always a matter of cookie cutter, everything is the same. that everything has to be similar or guided by a common principle. One of the issues that we typically see at this level is, okay, we're gonna get this thing started. How are we gonna connect everybody up, and who's gonna pay for it? You know, some members may be outliers, and it's gonna cost a lot more to run an interconnection to that member than to this member. Okay, this member, we can, 3 miles of line, we're good to go, and that's a pretty cheap member to have. Those issues need to be kind of dealt with up front, and to a certain extent, you can take an approach that each member's responsible for constructing themselves to the interconnection, or the cost of that interconnection may be folded into part of your project through rural development, because rural development, if they're not funding this connection, they're gonna be funding a new water plant or something else. So you've got to kind of take into consideration the member that's close by and gets hooked up inexpensively, may have to agree to accept some of the cost of hooking up the member farther away as part of just the overall team effort in getting the thing going and getting it off the ground. Because I don't know what your respective, logistically, where everyone is, hydraulically, how easy or difficult it is going to be to serve each member. But my point is there's going to be some situations that you're going to have to just work your way through it and say, well, how are we going to spread this cost in a way that's fair, that's not burdening members, but yet at the same time it is promoting growth of the entity, and because you want to foster membership. The more members you get, I think typically the better it works. Now at some point your board can get so large that it's hard to get a quorum and it's hard to get things done, but I don't think you're going to have a problem like that for several years. One of the issues that we in connections, the other is a lot of these entities may have existing arrangements with other suppliers that are not, have not expired. I don't know what sort of agreements you've got to purchase from other municipalities or whatnot, but those. Is a member going to be an exclusive member, or are they going to get half their water from somebody else? Now that's one of the areas where there can be a bit of a conflict of interest. Because if you have a member that's an exclusively reliant upon the entity, then they're all in. I mean, their chips are in the middle of the table. They're married to this thing. If you get somebody who's getting half their water from somebody else and half their water from here, you can have issues of playing one off against the other, manipulating usage, things of that nature. But doesn't mean it can't be done. You've got to deal with, you can't change the past. If you've got an entity that's looking at expanding and they're locked into an agreement, you're just gonna have, that, you can deal with that. Your contracts are going to not necessarily be identical, but you can deal with it. My point is that everyone who enters into an exclusive relationship to purchase their water from the entity is probably going to be very cooperative and have their own self-interest is going to be like with their other members, and typically you can balance these in a way where you can accomplish both objectives at the same time. As I said, my experience has been a very fortunate one in that, we don't always march in lockstep, and there's not always unanimity on each issue. You have different perspectives and different opinions, but the key point is that once it's decided, it's decided. You have to have unanimity after you've made the decision, not before. But once you've decided it, you've got to move on. And just as an aside, you know, some people are better at that than others. You know, just because you don't get your particular way on a particular issue should not set in motion a situation of escalation of, okay, if you're for it, I'm against it. And I have not encountered that. We have had not perfect unanimity, but almost very close. And usually if somebody's got an issue, it's something that the rest of us haven't thought about. And probably it should have. So, you know, there does have to be harmony, and there does have to be an ability to work together. But it's like within, you know, you've got the right to argue around your own dinner table. But when you just don't take it out of the house, you just keep it in-house. And once you decide, as I said, to move on, I don't know what sort of model necessarily you're looking at. Rural development, I've worked with rural development, I don't know who your area specialist is here, but I've worked on several projects at both the regional level and the rural water company level. And Mike Wallace was our area specialist when Gateway got started, and he has since moved on. Mike's in Champaign, and he's over in the state now. And so I have a long relationship with Mike going back. And this thing is, when you're doing something for the first time, there's hiccups along the way. I mean, you know, there just are. And you have to just work through it. It's not going to be a process where you're going to have your course plotted with complete accuracy along the way. I mean, I can probably give you some idea of the different issues that are liable to crop up, but there's a certain amount of this that you just have to, as I said, you just have to work through. And a lot of things come up that we never really contemplated, just because of the logistics of who's where. Do you have any? Are you going to use any entities to pass water through, or is your distribution's going to be all new lines? In our case, we knew Gateway was coming. So what we did is we went to rural development and said, okay, Northeast Marion County is going to build this water line. They're going to build a 6-inch water line for a little bit more money. We can build a 10-inch water line, and we can use it when Gateway comes on. They said, okay, fine. Well, it's a Northeast water line. Northeast paid for it. Northeast has got a mortgage on it, but now Gateway's using it. So we have to have a relationship between Northeast and Gateway to use and operate and maintain that line. But it has to be done in such a way that Northeast doesn't relinquish final control over it, because it's pledged as collateral to rural development. So, you run into things, who owns this meter, who owns that line going to it? You have to, there's going to be some things that you're going to have to use your imagination with, because basically it's all funding driven. I mean, we can say in a perfect world, this is how we'd like it to be, and we'd like Gateway or your entity to own this and own all these delivery meters and everything. But what happens is, as your funding comes through, you may be constructing part of this as a member's project. That member may actually own that delivery meter, whereas, so you kind of got to follow the money to a certain degree when you're building. And that can somehow, because perfecting their mortgage, rural development's finicky about that. So you've got to be able to kind of juggle this thing and put it together in a way that complies with what you're trying to do, and also all their rules and regulations. In rare circumstance, you could have a water line that was essentially given from one entity and taken over by the other. But that's going to be a difficult process with rural development. I mean, their general rule is, once they have a security on something, it needs to stay there. it's just easier to figure out another way to do it than to deal with that. So, from a organizational standpoint, you have whatever members you have. Typically, what we have done is each member amongst themselves selects a representative to the Gateway Board. The Gateway Board doesn't pick representatives, okay? They each select one and puts it on the board. And then the board then votes on all matters that come before it. But the point is we don't have one entity voting on who's gonna be a representative for another entity. And the reason why we do that is so that the point of all this is to stay out of each other's hair on everything except coming together for this purpose. We don't need to get into the politics of any individual member or what's going on there. That's their deal. They send a member. If they choose to send a member. We have some members that, hey, everything's working fine. You know, there's no problems. So we don't send somebody to the meetings. That's their prerogative. But the point is you have that right to send somebody there. They then take back with them to their boards what's going on at the Gateway, what's on the agenda, how Gateway is interacting with them, and of course one of the issues always is rates. And we've been very successful in keeping our rates low and what I think is steady. And that position seems to be enhanced with every additional member who comes on, because like I said, you're not really, adding in additional costs. You're just increasing the output of the water treatment plant. There's, you learn some lessons along the way. As I said, each member has a representative on the board, and then that board then sets policy. As I said, it votes on all motions, all pending matters, all budgeting. Typically, just as you do, you may have an attorney's report, an engineer's report, a treasurer's report, operator's report. And it functions, the board functions much the same way as the not-for-profit members or municipal members as your city council will do. Typically, it's the tipping point is you have to have enough members to make a cash flow, to get it off the ground. Once you do that, then as you pick up additional members, because what you will see is if successful, there's communities out there that say, hell no, I don't want anything to do with it. And then as things happen, as they proceed, eventually they realize and come around, and it's too good a deal to pass up. I mean, the thing it just is. Compared to the other arrangements that are out there for most of these types of entities. So usually, you run into local pride and a little bit of obstinance and so forth and so on, but usually the economics of the thing at some point in time, are just, you can't deny it. You can buy water from somebody that's got an old water plant on its last legs and it's probably fairly cheap. But as soon as they have to pour money into that thing, your rates are gonna go up. So, it depends on where you're positioned. If you're positioned in a place where you've got cheap water for the foreseeable future, then you really don't need an entity like this. If you're wondering, what are we gonna do next? Where do we go from here? We're tired of kind of being the puppet of somebody else pulling the strings and telling us what our rates are gonna be, then this is a way to do it. It's a very flexible entity. As I said, it's a not-for-profit corporation. You're not bound by some of the things that municipal corporations are. You can structure it in a number of different ways. I would suggest that, you know, you can always start with the equality of membership model and move it from there. If you have some particular reason, if you've got one entity that is, say, just a dominant customer, then maybe it's not fair that they only have one vote. Maybe they ought to have one vote. But in my experience, we have not had any votes close enough to make it matter. And depending on your particular circumstances, I mean, I can say that it has been a tremendous success in our instance. I mean, our membership seems to be well pleased with the quality of the water, with the price of it, and with the functioning of the entity. And there seems to be a certain amount of satisfaction in participating in the process, having your say, and rather than just being, here's the invoice, you know, here's how much we're going to charge you for the water. It could be the same price, but you're involved every step of the way, and you get to see, okay, what are we paying for our chemicals? What are we paying for our electricity? What's our labor? You get to see all that and vote on it and budget it. And in my experience, I mean, knock on wood, you know, we have not had a single problem. As I said, the only thing that I can really encounter is if you have somebody who may be trying to play one supplier off against the other, and usually you'll run into those on the periphery of your area, because you're going to have kind of a naturally concentrated area of entities that are interested for whatever reason. I mean, society's been going on for 40 years, is my guess, driving it kind of to there. And as you get on the periphery of that, you'll have people getting water from other districts, other sources. So that's something that you may have an issue with. But is there any questions? I mean, that's kind of my overview of our experience in organizing and functioning. We've been functioning about 80 years. Hennigan's can tell you all of the statistical information.
How have you been on right-of-ways and stuff like that to get through?
Well, I do all right-of-ways for my rural water company clients as well as Gateway. Honestly, we don't have nearly the mileage of right-of-way for Gateway that we do for our members. You know, our members may have a 100-mile extension. You know, Gateway is usually, when we first got started, we had a transmission line that we actually had to pay for. It was a small water transmission line. Our experience with getting it right away is the same as our membership. You know, it's really no different, no better. You're kind of, unfortunately, a victim of all prior offenders. So by the time you get there to ask for an easement, you know, if there's been some history of abuse on either internet cable companies, phone companies, oil companies, I mean, that's where I see most of the pushback, and it's tough at this level because most of your members, you probably have a rule in your bylaws that says you have to grant easement if you're going to be a member. So I can't be a member over here and refuse to grant easement over there. And that's a pretty effective way of dealing with some of that. You don't have that on this level. You know, people can refuse to grant easement. What we typically do is if we have to, we go on the right of way under Article 9 or Section 9 of the Water District Act. They expanded that to allow not-for-profit corporations to use the public right of way for water line purposes. That's an issue unto itself that is it's a way of proceeding of last resort.
And liability, how far back would it go from the regional board? Could they go back to each board member with liability?
Well, board members on not-for-profit corporations have statutory immunity. Okay, so, because board members, I didn't mention this, not-for-profit corporations, they're volunteers. Okay, they're not compensated. It's being on a not-for-profit board is akin to being a public servant in that sense. So in order to encourage people to serve in this quasi-municipal capacity, because remember, we're serving a public good, we're providing water and electricity, they provide an immunity under the Not-for-Profit Business Corporations Act for all negligence. Now, if you were to do something willful and wantonly and get out in your truck and run somebody down, you could be held liable, and you should. But you're not held liable just because you participate as a board member on an entity. Yes, you have, it's built into the statute. So your board members, I mean, from a liability standpoint, I don't know what liability you would have that you don't already have. I mean, you're getting water from someplace and you're supplying it to customers, and it's gotta be good water. So, you're not really, I mean, you're a not-for-profit corporation. This is a really unusual animal, because what's gonna happen to it? I mean, it's, even if it were to, you know, some catastrophic event, you're a quasi-municipal public entity with public funding. I mean, somewhere along the line, somebody's gonna come in and you know, and work with you to try to go forward if you run into something. So it's a little different. It's not like you say, okay, sales are bad, we're closing up shop. And this thing has to keep going. So you've got to just kind of find a way to make it work. And usually rural development is on board with that, because, you know, that's what they're for. I mean, they're trying to provide water to people who otherwise wouldn't have it. But liability, I mean, you're gonna have some additional liability, just the entity itself, and it'll have to insure against it.
In your opinion, with your experience with Gateway, did some of your members have like satellites already, and then are they better off to be individual members, or?
Well, the sub-member issue is one that is can be addressed in a number of different ways. And it really kind of depends upon the relationship between the member and the satellite. If the satellite wants to be a member, some satellites don't want to be a member of the regional entity, but they can be. You know, you have to arrange your contracts in a certain way. Typically, what you may see is the entity will say, hey, we don't want our members selling water to other satellites without our approval. And so usually what we have, for example, is we have an agreement amongst all of our entities to interconnect. Okay, because one of the things you want to keep control of is who's connected to who and what your rates are. And, you know, if a member wants to sell water to another member, you look at that. In some cases, it may make more sense for that satellite to be the direct member of the regional supplier and pass it through. In other circumstances, it may just be hydraulically complicated, and you may just say, look, you're better off staying as a customer of a member than becoming a member yourself. But that is an issue that really needs to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. Because every situation seems to be a little different. You know, you may have some systems that don't have any storage. They may be entirely reliant upon the member to provide storage and or pressure. So, you know, in that circumstance, you know, you may just have a member with a satellite. But it can, you know, you can, that's the beauty of the thing, is you can kind of adjust on the ground as the thing unfolds. You know, you can, as long as you've got kind of some guiding principles directing you, you move forward, because what we saw were, in our case, the lead entity that decided to move forward dropped out. Okay, Centralia was the one that started the whole thing, and then they backed up and backed out, and kind of left the thing left high and dry, and the other people in the room said, well, shoot, if they're not gonna go forward, what can we maybe pick up the pieces and go ourselves? And so they did. But in my experience, joining together, assuming you can do it through your engineering, but it has been a very positive. I don't think we have a single member that is not well pleased with their role in the organization, and it's fairly uncomplex. I mean, everybody gets minutes, everybody gets the financial statements. Everybody knows what's going on. If they have a particular problem or issue, we put it on the agenda and talk about it. But what I have found is that you get because I'm just kind of a fly on the wall in a lot of these instances, you get different perspectives from different members, and you can kind of see the thought process, the deliberation, which is what it's supposed to be, a deliberation. There's an issue out there, let's talk about it. Well, if you thought about this, if you thought about that, well, how's it going to affect this other thing? So it works as well as the members. It's only as strong as its membership and the quality of the people that are there. But usually, if you're talking about people that are self-motivated, that are looking to create an entity, that they already have that spirit and that thing anyway. You have any other questions?
So the Rural Development Office of General Counsel has looked at this and approved it, obviously, in the past with Gateway 4-1.
Well, they looked at the organizational documents when it got started. We have changed Office of General Counsel from Chicago now to Kansas City. My general philosophy is the less contact you have with them, the better.
Is that emotional second?
So you only go there if somebody says you have to have their approval or something, you do. That's one thing of the Gateway model that I'm not the biggest fan of, is our water purchase agreements. And those were kind of already in place when I came on board. Rural Development was experimenting with this was a new entity. How are these agreements going to work? They kind of cabbaged on some old forms they had. I would try to persuade them going forward. I would start with a clean slate and I mean, there's lots of things in those purchase agreements that can be used that need to be there, but the way it's organized, and there's just lots of things about that leave something to be desired from my standpoint. If I was starting from a clean slate and drafting an agreement, that's not how I would do it. That's kind of how they already kind of had that process in place. And my thought is Mike, I know Mike well enough that if you prepare something, they'll take a look at it, and if it does meets all the criteria. I don't know that they're married to that particular form. I'm just not fond of it. But typically, the water purchase agreement, you lay out, and you may have minimums and maximums. I don't know. You may say you've got because what you generally do is get an idea of what's your usage. And everybody wants to pump their numbers up. Well, be careful pumping those numbers up too much. Because what you'll do is you'll captivate your supply and you won't be able to allocate it anywhere else. What you do is you come up with a real number, and then that doesn't mean that you can't grow in the future. You know, you come in with a real number, if you're gonna have a factory built and you're gonna need a lot more water the next year, you just come to the board and say, hey, this is going on. You know, we may need to up our allocation, our minimum maximums. Okay, we go on. But you don't want to claim water you're not gonna use, because that's just locking it away for somebody else to use. And you can always get more. I mean, as long as there's capacity to do it, no one's gonna begrudge you adding to your supply. But what you don't wanna do is start off with numbers that are not realistic, because then you'll wind up in a cash flow bind or shortage.
One last question, so if this group likes the gateway model, what kind of time frame are you looking at from the day someone would say, we wanna establish as an entity, we wanna create bylaws, get registered with the Secretary of State, how long of a process is that?
Well, filing with the Secretary of State's very simple. I mean, that's something that can be done in a matter of minutes. It's not complicated. You're getting your bylaws together is, and your water purchase agreements are gonna be the two main things. And what I would suggest is that you have a committee for the bylaws, and you kind of cafeteria plan it. You may look at bylaws of other organizations. You may look at your own bylaws and bylaws of other organizations and say, you know, we like this, not so much. But you know, as from a lawyer standpoint, turning the bylaws around is a matter of days. But you've got to have an agreement amongst people as to what it should say. So that's going to take. My guess is that's going to take a few months. I mean, get everybody on board and make a decision as to, okay, this is, and keep in mind that bylaws can be changed. I mean, they're a point of beginning, not an end. A bylaw is a fundamental change, so usually it requires a supermajority, because changing your bylaws is kind of a big deal. You can set it up any way you want to, you don't have to have one. But really, it's just a matter of filing your documentation with the state, getting bylaws and getting water purchase agreements. But that is, my guess is that's not going to be the critical path. The critical path is going to be funding, I'm going to imagine.
It is, but it's circular to start an application process with rural development. They need an entity separate from one of these three individually that is the new entity to turn in an application. So right now, they're kind of on the same
You can
path.
get the entity set up, but you may not be. You're not going to necessarily have water purchase contracts with all your members, or, you know, I don't know. My thought is you probably have to coordinate, talk to your rural development person as far as, okay, what's our requirements to move forward from this step organizationally? I mean, usually you have to file some sort of, I forget what it's called, an opinion, corporate organization and authorization or something. I mean, it's one of their.
We've actually met with Mike a couple times.
Yeah, he's on. I mean, Mike clearly is on board. I mean, with the concept. But as far as, you know, once you file your articles, you're a legal entity, and that can be done online. Well, if there's nothing else, all right. Well, thanks.
Thank you very much.
preference for organization? And selecting an attorney? Discussion?
Well, I think the gateway model, I mean, personally, I think the gateway model works. I just would hope that everybody would have the same enthusiasm to cooperate, deliver water to our customers, and I think they do. I think that everybody here has got one thing on their mind. I come from a very unique not-for-profit, so, you know, our board's very, there's no politics involved anywhere in it. It's just what's good for everybody. And I think that the representatives coming from the municipalities can do the same. I know, I'd say, it's kind of like fighting at home with the family, but once you go outside, don't touch the family, because we're all together. That's the way it's gotta be. What do you think, Steve?
I agree with you, Alan. I mean, everybody wants to be fair on it. I mean, nobody's gonna try to get ahead of the other guy. That's what we're trying to do.
We're not
equally everybody.
And it just seems unfathomable that we can't compete with a for-profit, stock-owned company. At first, I could see that the initial investment's going to be high, but I can also see it'll have a lot of technology with it, and then it'll all be new. And then probably for about 20 years, we can run with minimal maintenance and adapt. And I do believe that as the profitable companies come with water, I'm hearing that in Colorado, people are getting $300 and $400 a month water bills. You know, because water's such a commodity. And I believe that, you know, it's going to be that way here. And I just, if we have control of our own destiny, I still like to drive a car. I don't want to hop in one that drives for me, because it might not be going where I want to go.
Tim, you had a comment?
Did anybody ask Mr. Foreman if he had entertained the idea of representing this group?
No. Well, it's still, yeah.
Is he still there?
Yeah.
Well, catch him before he gets away.
I did ask him that, Tim, he would be available to do that, as long as, you know, with the distance from here to Salem, we can work that out.
I think that's the next thing on the
He's in
agenda.
Salem.
One thing about it, he's got more knowledge on anybody else done it.
And he talked about not needing to be there, well, I'll see himself.
Yeah.
Mr. Foreman, come on back.
Yeah, what can I?
The question is, do you have an interest in being considered as an attorney for this new group going forward?
Sure.
Tim, did I phrase it right? Is that more or less?
Absolutely.
Okay.
My thought is that you want, if you can avoid multiple, you know, trips back and forth, because that's kind of, you know, dead money. You're not, you schedule things in a way to where you can, you know, come as needed perhaps. And there's gonna be certain points in time where you're probably gonna need an attorney present. There might be others when you don't. So my thought would be is yes, but you try to only have me come over when you really need me to. Because it is a 2-hour trip each way. I mean, so, you
Well,
know.
the board's small enough, we can come to you, it saves money.
Or we can go halfway, or we can do a number of things.
I can put them
You
all
know,
in
but
the
yeah,
car.
I'd be more than happy to. That's kind of what one of the things I've aspired to do. There's not a lot of people that do this.
Right.
It's kind of an unusual area of the law.
Is a Skype meeting available? I mean, I know we can do it technically, legally, is that a potential for some meetings?
You guys can meet any way you want. Yeah, you're not subject to that. The Open Meetings Act has a specific provision in about electronic participation, and they've recently changed it. Basically, you can't participate in a municipal or political body's meeting via Skype unless you're like in the hospital or something. You have to have a health reason or something, just that, well, I'm out of town this week, or I'm on vacation, or we went to Florida for the winter, doesn't work. So, but you're not subject to that, so you guys, I mean, a not-for-profit could meet any way you want. And typically what you can do is you can have attorneys' reports, and I don't mean to scare you off, it's just that, you know, driving back and forth is, in my opinion, and you can, usually what I do, lots of times I show up to meetings, they put me on the agenda early, so I get in and get out, so I'm not just sitting there, twiddling my thumbs.
I think maybe you could meet the board Skype with you, rather than have
Yes.
the board itself Skype.
Sure. We
It's
can,
safe to say you from driving up here and up
Sure.
down there.
that would be possible. I mean, I've never done it,
I haven't.
but I'd be willing to give it a shot.
We can get you set up, and maybe for a lot of the routine stuff, that saves travel, there's certain times you would need to be here face to face.
And I forgot to mention, but, you know, I've worked with Hennigan's on all these projects, in the Centralia office. I don't know if any of you know Mike Collins or Centralia also. I know with Wally pretty closely. If you want an honest opinion, ask Wally, I'm sure he'll tell you.
We're asking about his tractors.
You'll be home by the time he's done giving his
Yeah.
opinion, so.
All righty, well, have a good evening.
Thank you, sir.
Can I get a question in? John Kraft, I'm just curious, as it appears you guys are getting ready to vote on what type of organization to form, and I'm curious as if the municipal and township representatives have already been given that power by your municipalities and townships to commit to a binding vote, or if this is just something that they're gonna take back to their municipalities and get an affirmative vote from the municipalities and the townships and whoever else prior to this decision tonight becoming binding. Because I don't believe, unless they've already been given the power in a public meeting to bind the city, that they can actually bind the city at this meeting with any votes. And I'm not saying whether they vote for it or not, I'm just throwing that out there because there's gonna be questions asked, and I'll probably be the one asking them in another venue, whether these people sitting here were given the power through their public elected boards to do this.
I know Jersey Rural Water has selected Allen to be theirs, and we're not
But were
tied
they,
into the city.
did they
We're-
give him the power to make a vote binding the Jersey?
He would have to answer for
Jersey
himself.
County Rural
Yeah,
Water.
you're a private corporation.
We're a private corporation.
You can do
My
whatever
board
you
of
want.
directors have given me permission to proceed as.
Yeah, I wouldn't even question that. I'm talking about
My board of
Carlinville
directors has
and
done the
anybody
same.
else.
I can't answer for Carlinville.
Yeah.
It is
So
my
they've given you,
Oh, wait. My understanding is that, yes, we took a vote in a public meeting to move forward with forming the entity so that we could request funding. And that was in a public meeting and there was a majority vote to do that, so that we could fill out even the paperwork to apply for funding. Until we form an entity, legally, we can't even ask for funding for the project. So, yes, I believe that vote was so that our records would show that we were given that.
The vote to move forward, it didn't say vote to move forward with a private quasi whatever corporation or a water commission. You have to get an affirmative vote on whatever you're gonna vote on before it becomes binding on this public or on this private body. Go ahead and vote. I'm just throwing it out there.
It is true that in our meeting, we did not say the words quasi-public in our vote. That is accurate. That was not stated.
Cindy, were you given permission, I don't know, to vote on anything binding? So anything you're gonna vote on to bind the city? It
I'm
sounds
not
like
sure
that's
what you would vote on
You're
in a
gonna do a
board
legal
meeting
agreement,
that
right?
isn't. I'm not sure why. I mean, we had a vote also that we send a representative. We had a vote that we go forward with forming an entity so that we could submit the paperwork to ask for funding through rural development. So that's my understanding, that yes, we voted to move forward. We voted to move forward with trying to get funding for the project. It was said in many meetings that we can't do that until we form an entity.
I just thought you had to go back and talk about, have you reported all this, that you're gonna be doing something binding tonight? Does everybody in the council and whoever, I don't know, the water group, whoever, do they know that you would be signing a binding agreement for attorneys, or how it's gonna be set up?
Yes, we discussed the fact that we have to have attorneys, we have to have a mailing address, we have to have all of those things, so I guess, I mean, correct me, someone who's at our meetings, I'm assuming, yes, that is an understanding when we say we've put forth money so that we can hire attorneys and form an entity and request funding. I think I personally, as a council member, was making the assumption that yes, you're going to sign some paperwork and you're going to need to put money toward attorneys, but
I believe that this whole formation process was under the auspice that it was gonna be a not-for-profit, everybody had a vote type. This is what's been going on for the last year and a half.
Well, that's not what the Carlinville City Council has been telling the public people and taxpayers of Carlinville, which is why I'm asking the question. And you guys can vote what you want. My point is, you said you discussed this and discussed that. Were you given the authority in writing, in a vote, to come here and vote, yes, I want this to be a not-for-profit water company, or yes, I want this to be a water commission, or yes, I want this to be a cooperative? Were you given that authority? I don't think you were. But regardless of that, you can vote, but what I'm saying is until the city of Carlinville gives that authority, I really don't think it's binding on the city of Carlinville what she votes on tonight until the city does that in a public meeting. You can't form a private entity without, once the thing's formed, it can be private, so be it. But the
For instance, does
formation
the
needs to be
council all
open.
know, does everybody in the council know you're here tonight at this meeting to vote these issues? Have they seen this agenda?
I did not distribute an agenda, no.
So they don't know, everybody on the council wouldn't know this?
I'm not sure about that.
Has everybody on the council been appointed the representative for Carlinville?
We can't have a quorum here
It was that one
tonight.
right there.
No,
We
but-
can't have every council member
No,
who's
Cindy, I
on the
understand.
city council here, or we have a quorum.
Actually, you can, they just can't all discuss
Our
it.
next meeting is the first Monday night in October, so if everyone would be willing,
Maybe we could just take a vote.
I would
Yes.
like to go back to the city council
Yes.
and give a full explanation of exactly what was said tonight and ask for the written permission to vote so that we can move forward.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we vote on it
Yes.
and subject to your meeting, your authority to be carried through that.
We'll do that if you. Okay.
You can abstain if you want. If you want to abstain, that's fine, because
You can all vote pending a decision by the city, and that's fine.
She's authorized to vote.
Well,
right.
I
I've been
understand all
given
that.
permission
We
to
don't
vote
want you to do anything you're uncomfortable with.
no, we don't want you to do anything
You
uncomfortable.
waited until the
You know, I just
discussion's
hope
over,
that
then
this
there's
is
some
a
paper.
prelude
because
to
nobody
what
else
could
read it.
happen later on down the line. You know, because we all want to work together. I mean, the whole goal is not to do anything that's ridiculous. It's to deliver a water product to our customers at the lowest rate we can do it at, and good quality water.
Right,
I
and be
understand
transparent.
that.
There's nothing here that I know of that's got a hidden agenda other than, can we do this as a cooperative effort?
This is something I.
Jersey County Rural, if somebody wants to take the lead, let them. I don't care. All I want is some water.
I understand that,
Yes.
and I understand we're wanting to be everything above board, but like what just happened, nobody knows what was handed to her, and nobody can read what's on those papers.
This is a private email that you're welcome to have.
And the taxpayers, and I'm not a taxpayer in Carlinville, I'm from over in Edgar County, but we've run through this type of situation before, and it gives the appearance that the purpose of forming the nonprofit is to keep the public's noses and eyes and ears out of the business of the nonprofit. And
No,
Not at all.
No, the purpose is to keep the water cheap.
That's-
I
If you have,
understand.
if you have a profit
So-
organization, they want the profit, the stockholders want return on their money. It's no
And
different than, it's no different than the way.
I'm the
operates
township
we operate
supervisor
ours.
of Elsaw Township, so I deal with government also on the other hand. And, you know, the whole thing is, anybody that wants to know anything, I welcome them to open the books up, ask any questions they want. You know how many people show up at those meetings? Nobody.
Probably not, but, you know.
Nobody, and I beg them, I even at the end of the year, here are the books, would you come look at them?
But I'm-
They don't wanna look at them.
One of these entities here has a real problem with transparency. They've got 4 lawsuits against them right now, fixing to have a 5th one. And that's the reason why I'm raising these questions, because I don't believe anybody from the city of Carlinville was given explicit permission to come here and take a binding vote tonight.
Well-
That might have happened, I don't know.
Yeah, and
From
you
what
know,
I've been told it
God
happened.
love you, God love you. I'm sure he does, he loves every one of us. But it's really not my problem. And I really don't want to deal with it because now all of a sudden, we're switching over into politics. And I don't want to deal with politics with this.
I don't either, I just
I would
wanna.
like
Go ahead, I'll get to you in a second, sir. Go ahead. Cindy.
Whether or not, obviously, I'm not gonna vote tonight, because I wanna make sure that what I understood about my role in this board is accurate. And that every council member agrees that what they voted on is that I am given the authority to do those things. So absolutely, I will do that, and I think it is in the best interest of the city. But I would also say that the majority of the council has voted, and we want to cooperate with the entities involved. The attitude is that we have a problem that we would like to solve, and that we know that having help doing that is a benefit to us, and it's a benefit to you. And we want to work with other communities to solve that issue. Whether or not at home, we may have political issues that we need to solve, I'm not debating that. I don't think that that has to be part of how we move forward. I will go home and I will deal with those issues at our next public meeting. I apologize that any of that was an issue. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding on my part about what exactly the council voted on. So we will clarify that, but it is our intention to be cooperative, and that I believe that we still have everything that he talked about, that we have communities who want to work together. And I just want to assure you that that is where the majority of the council comes from.
Thank you.
Back to you, sir.
Did you have another question?
Yeah, just 2 points. I don't know, again, I understand you guys are private. I don't know how many other are representing public bodies. Have you looked into intergovernmental agreements to do the same thing?
Sometimes the intergovernmental.
Being a private one, I would really appreciate to hear that from the folks that are it's an
Well, I worked
intergovernmental.
with some with the township. We work with other townships.
Have you looked at that in the water for what you guys are trying to accomplish? Doing it through intergovernmental agreements?
My opinion is the intergovernmental agreement kind of doesn't give us the benefit of going after funding as a new separate entity, so that would be the main reason to go after a separate entity, a separate president.
We don't qualify for intergovernmental agreement.
And that's why I said, I don't know the whole makeup here is, it would
the
only,
issue.
Right.
That's the issue, we do not qualify for an intergovernmental agreement, because we're a not-for-profit, so we can't organize and be a part of it if it's an intergovernmental agreement.
okay, the second part, and maybe it springboards off the point, maybe it got lost in the motion. Part of the importance of making sure from the public body standpoint that it is done properly. You all have ever, if you've been in this business long enough, you know there's gonna be people that are gonna oppose it, people that are gonna be in favor of it. You wanna make sure all the i's are dotted, t's are crossed, and I appreciate the fact she's taking that back and making sure that's done, because if somebody raises the issue and they say, well, you can represent at this meeting, but they never gave you power to vote, when you take that next step, those actions can be basically nullified in future action, and that, I think, is what he's trying to point out, that to avoid that pitfall that it will come eventually with somebody that wants to make a stink over it, whether it's a for-profit water company or whatever else. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you do by a show of hands, who are the private entities and who are the like Ms. Campbell?
Excuse
I'm the
me.
only private entity here.
Well, they said something too about it, so I'm a little confused.
While we're together,
Oh.
He's the manager.
Then would you show me, please, who are the people that are gonna vote on this, that are sitting here that have the one vote? 3 people.
Yeah, there's only 3 entities.
There's only 3 entities
Okay.
right now.
Okay, so the other people won't be voting, and you're private, and she's municipality. Thank you. Because when you introduced yourselves, we really, in all fairness, can't hear you.
Yeah, no, we're the representatives for the 3 entities.
We're nonprofit.
Thank you.
So it's 2 nonprofit and 1.
2 nonprofit and 1 municipality.
We're a district though.
Well, we're a district, we're not for profit.
Yeah.
Well, you're a public body or you're
You have to answer that, Mark?
We're a public water district, public body. FOIA, Open Meetings Act, we have to follow all the
your
rules.
trustees
just like
elected or
the
appointed?
I'm sorry?
Your trustees elected or appointed?
Appointed. Currently.
So tonight there'll be 3 votes, unless,
2 votes, she's abstaining.
yes, she's abstaining.
All right.
Are there any other questions on this issue from potential voting members or the rest of the group? Is there a motion for item 5 at this time?
And that is,
Organizational preference.
I make the motion that we accept the not-for-profit, one vote, 1 member organization of the Gateway model after Gateway.
Okay, is there a second? Second, is there any other discussion from the group, from voting members? All right, let's do a voice vote. Rupert?
Aye.
Davenport?
Yes.
Campbell?
Abstain.
Okay. Thank you.
What'd you think?
Southwest.
Okay, back to item 5, I'll just run with this for a bit. Is there any motion or discussion on selection of an attorney for, think
I said yes. So you made the motion, I'll second it.
I'll make a motion, we have everybody spoke tonight.
I have a question on that, if I may, sir.
Excuse me?
I have a question on
Yes.
that. In regards to hiring an attorney, one thing I didn't hear anybody ask, what's his
What's
rate?
his fees?
Yes.
I mean, in all fairness, gentlemen,
I had the same question.
in all fairness, if you're going to save people money,
You're right.
you don't hire an attorney without at least finding out what his letter of engagement requires.
All right, so I make the motion that we seek a letter of engagement from him
Okay.
with attorney's fees, travel time, mileage, anything involved, even if he's gonna put a suit on.
You gonna seek that for others as well, or just from him?
We'll seek it from him from right now. We won't say that he's gonna be the one. We have some comparable that we have our own attorneys that we can look at, or at least we do.
We'll ask him for his scope of services, and we'll ask him for his qualifications as related to a regional water entity.
Probably a little qualified, and it has not necessarily qualified, but the most experience of anybody around. There's only one other down here at Gateway that's informed, isn't there? I've got models, I think, everyone else can get lost.
Do you have anyone else you would like to seek this from?
I don't know if anybody would be in the utilities like that right offhand.
I'm sorry.
Do you have any
My expertise
discussion
is
right now?
criminal.
Do you have any attorneys that you have an interest in seeking the same information from?
I don't, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on the scope of service of attorneys at the moment. I mean, I'm certainly open to us finding other attorneys that cover these kind of services. I do think the commission, there are probably not very many of them. But, I would like to see what his scope of services,
You're okay
and what
with
his fees
going
are,
on?
research how to do things, and this guy here's already done it.
Sure.
I do think he.
You know, you might talk to Mike Wallace and ask him, because obviously rural development and several, I really don't wanna go north of I-80 though.
Honestly, though, I feel that if his services are speaking for themselves, in that he has already done this and fairly successfully with Gateway, so if we, see his fees and we think they're reasonable, I don't understand why we would need to go outside of that if we know that the best resume you can have is success, and so I would say, if we feel his fees are reasonable, I don't see any reason why we need to go looking.
You each have a baseline for what you pay your own attorney.
Right.
So
We have a
that'd be a good
baseline.
comparison, just to see how his rates stack up.
I have some personal,
If there's something
I
glaring.
have some relatives that are attorneys, and I'll talk to them,
Okay.
see how reasonable he is.
And I've talked to Mr. Foreman, this doesn't necessarily mean he has to be the attorney for 10 years, this could just be for the setup phase of the project, and then.
Every year we
decide
can
to-
renew that contract. Every year, that contract can be renewed. We do that here. Keeps everybody on their toes.
So we have a motion from Davenport to seek qualifications, rate schedule, scope of services for legal services related to the regional entity. Second by Rupert, do a voice vote, Mr. Rupert. Mr. Davenport?
Yes.
Can I ask before I vote if this is going to appropriate any funds current?
This is
Is
a motion
anything
just for
binding?
information, so
Then I will
you would
vote
make a
yes.
separate motion later, potentially higher.
Then I would vote yes.
Okay, thank you. Motion carried.
Can we name it?
Sorry, you were on item 6.
I thought the suggestion of naming it after the aquifer was an excellent.
Okay.
Can you spell it?
I can, I did, it's in our minutes from last meeting, let me pull it out so I can tell you exactly. Unless someone else already has it. Illinois Alluvial Regional was one of them. Central Southwest Regional was another one thrown out.
I think the Illinois Alluvial Regional would be my motion.
Can you spell that for us?
Yeah. Alluvial. That's the name of the aquifer that's running underneath that we would be getting the water from.
So Illinois Alluvial,
Would you spell it?
Region.
Spell it again,
Alluvial.
Is it the same aquifer even if you have to move, if Jerseyville comes on board or not? Is it the same?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, even if Jerseyville comes on board.
so is that Illinois Alluvial Regional Water Company?
Yes.
Would you call it a company?
With this model that you're going potentially.
Okay.
The name can be changed just like your bylaws or anything else. You need a starting point.
What is the size of this aquifer?
It runs, we're at the southern tip, and it goes all the way up to the middle of the state.
Mile-wise?
Like 150, 200 miles?
Yeah, it's up past Springfield.
It comes over to this side of the state, so,
Do other people draw off of that?
well, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Do we know who they are, no, or?
I don't know that we have,
We do.
You do?
There is actually a public database through the Illinois State Water Survey
Okay.
that is accessible, that shows all the wells within that shallow aquifer and groundwater wells throughout the state of Illinois.
Okay.
So that data is geo-referenced. There are log numbers for each well. So, all the information out there.
Okay, motion from Mr. Davenport to name the group Illinois Alluvial Regional Water Company. Do we have a second? Second. Okay, with voice vote, Mr. Rupert. Mr. Davenport.
yes.
Mrs. Campbell.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Okay, on item 7, you guys have a preference on a mailing address location for depositing the funds committed by each entity.
I would prefer maybe to just wait for that until you get everything clarified. We really haven't discussed that amongst ourselves. I haven't, maybe have you discussed it? Have you discussed it? We haven't discussed that, so I think we need to just have a sub-meeting and table that for right now.
Very good.
So there's, I don't know if you.
I think it would be helpful to possibly know who's going to be doing treasurer type duties in order to decide what bank he would be at. I'm just saying, you know, if we're gonna have assigned duties, I'm assuming on the board, so it would make sense to put the banking, in Carlinville if it's you. So I think maybe we need to wait until, I have a little bit more clarification and then we can move forward with making a common sense decision at that time.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Is there any other new business before the board? Okay, so the action items will be developing feedback from Carlinville on actionability for moving forward with this concept, and then continue on with the location for depositing funds. And then we got on there these future agenda items that were identified will come into play as far as identifying terms.
I think
setting up bylaws.
Yeah, and I think some of this stuff will be binding, so therefore I think that, you know, I would love to see a full board. I don't wanna see, what we did tonight is preliminary. It does establish some stuff, but I wanna see, my feeling is I want all full participation. I don't want just Steve and I doing
That's
it.
like the gentleman said, the I's and T's only.
Yeah,
Keep you straight with the city of Carlinville.
get everybody straight there. And, you know, the
And I
transparency.
apologize for the delay and for the misunderstanding.
Yeah, and
And I
there's,
take responsibility for that myself, that I
you don't have
didn't
to
understand.
apologize because it's not necessary. I'm in government, I understand.
At least none does it.
It's just, I'm not quite as big a show as you are. I'm in
I
a
didn't
little
know we
show.
were that big a show, but,
I'm just a little silent.
no, I wanna do it correctly, because I think it's not just in our interest, but it's in yours, so we wanna do it.
Then I'll move to adjourn.
Can I ask something? Is it possible on the agenda when you have your next meeting, can we get a list of all the people that are gonna be on the board? You guys are considered the board for this, correct?
Three of us.
Just three of yous?
They're
They're
engineers, we
just
haven't
planning.
even hired them yet.
Okay,
Look me up after the meeting is a short answer, and I have it.
okay.
I'll give it to you.
I mean, I just like to know the names of everybody.
Sure.
I mean, I know everybody introduced themselves, but
Yep.
I'm not
In
familiar
addition
with
to
most
that-
of you.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
You do agendas and minutes for all the meetings?
We do, yes.
Okay. So, like Cindy gets those, and do you, do you show them to Fosterburg?
Until this group of three instructs us otherwise, that information goes to these three board members.
But can they share that with the city council, for instance? You didn't share yours with Fosterburg either, like any
Yeah,
minutes or
yeah.
agenda?
I take mine to Fosterburg and share them with them.
Okay.
Well,
That's
yeah,
the
once
best-
it comes into the hand of a member of a public body that's on this
The-
board,
the-
it's public record.
My job on this board is to keep my board informed of what goes on here.
So you
That's
tell
my
them when
job.
there's a meeting and
They
it's
tell me
posted
when
somewhere, so
I'm not real good with computers.
That's all right.
They tell me when the
Need to
meeting is.
do.
I attend the meeting, they tell me what issues they want addressed, I address them for them on the board, for this board. Then I take it back to Fosterburg Water Board, tell them what they said here, then they instruct me what to do at the next one. They will tell me, yes, hire this
I'm sorry,
attorney
what,
here.
Deanna, what?
Then I will do whatever their
I
request
was
are.
just making a comment about Cindy.
I'm sorry, I was hearing her and I couldn't hear you.
So she was voted on by the council, she abstained, and it was a unanimous vote except for her Correct.
No, she was asking you,
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that before we left.
Okay, well, anyway, back to, I'm just wondering if Cindy, if you get agendas or you can inform the council or post when these meetings are, so they all know, or just give them reports of what's going on. I didn't know, have you done that yet?
I didn't really know that I had anything to report, because we were just still gathering information. So,
I just see, that's okay, I understand, so.
I thought we were still in the gathering information phase, so I did not bring, an update to the council. No, I did not.
Because I'm not as involved as I should be on this, but my idea of what you were doing, where you were just to gather information, bring it back and inform everybody. So any meetings you've had so far, or when there's gonna be a meeting, like, obviously they all knew, but does the council know, or do the people know? So that, I'm just saying, it's something I think, that way people feel like they're getting transparency on this project.
I'm not
and they're
trying not to be transparent.
Okay,
I literally don't know
Right.
what I'm doing yet.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to learn, and that my heart is in the right place. I want Carlinville to have water. I care about my community. I'm trying to learn what my role is. I obviously had some misunderstanding about the vote that was taken. And I'm grateful, actually, that you brought that up, because I do want to do it.
All right, good, we're fine, that's all.
I truly do.
I'm not saying you're trying, I'm not trying to say either.
Communicate really well.
And I'm not trying.
And I will improve it in the future.
And I'm not trying to say that you aren't, it's just that it hasn't happened. So as a citizen and a taxpayer, because we're all gonna be in this together, I would like to know what's going on when there are meetings and sort of what happens at them, because I'm not gonna make all the meetings, so I'm relying on my alderman to tell me what's going on.
I will place an item on the agenda after our meetings from here on out to give an update of what was discussed, and I will bring the minutes to the meetings from here on out.
Yeah, and then a notification of when the meetings are, so we can come with notice.
Sometimes that's very difficult, because all of us have lives, so they have to coordinate a time, so that we can all be here, especially when you're looking at three entities right
Just like
now.
the attorney tonight, that worked into his schedule.
We had his schedule to work in. I was supposed to be on vacation right now.
Yeah, no, I understand, I truly
But
understand.
surely you knew 2 or 3 days ago you were coming.
Yeah, but my vacation was planned 6 months ago.
No, that's
Does that make
unfortunate for
sense?
you.
I prepare.
Just have one quick question in regards to future meetings. When you guys set this up and you set your bylaws up, you'll be as I understand it, a not-for-profit corporation. Are you going to allow the public to attend those meetings?
As a Freedom of Information Act and all I deal with as supervisor.
What township is that?
Elsa in Jersey County. I can appreciate that, and I enjoy having the people there as long as they're not disruptive to the function of the meeting. And I think that that's the important thing, as long as it's not disruption to the function. In other words, if we're gonna have a functional issue, we're not subject to Freedom of Information and Open Meetings Act, and I would say that, at some point in time, the buck's gotta stop.
Well, that doesn't answer my question.
As far as I'm concerned, I don't care if the public's there, but like Alan said, if it gets to a point where more so addressing the public, more so than getting anything done up here, we have the right to close the meeting.
Right.
I mean,
That was
as
my
far as the public, again, like he said earlier, we have nothing to hide. Everybody's in this for each other. We're doing this for Carlinville. Carlinville's doing it for us.
Maybe you can set up a meeting other than that. I know guys' time is valuable. Maybe you could do your meeting and then have an informational meeting for the public, so the public knows.
And
I mean,
the
it's nice
reason-
that you guys know, but it'd be nice if the public would know.
The reason I was asking that, when you guys do set up your bylaws, it would be nice to know that this new organization that has everyone's interest at heart is going to be open and transparent, at least by allowing the public to witness the meetings.
Oh, absolutely. I have no problem with witnessing the meeting. Like I said, as long as it doesn't become a disruption to the
Oh,
function.
I'm all for proper decorum. I got no problem with that.
Fosterburg is working on a website right now, and on that, I have a page specifically for this entity. And my goal is to have all minutes, all agendas on that, on our website, so you can go on there. It's on the very first page, it says, alternate water sources, and the more information you get here, and it goes directly.
Which legally can only happen if this public body puts in the bylaws that you can publicly release those records.
Right.
Because if that's not your bylaws, you could be off the board for whatever reason, and a new person come in, they say, hey, we don't have to give any of that up. That's why I emphasize bylaws.
An attorney would advise us upon, when we hire an attorney, he would advise
You're
us.
gonna,
which
they'll
governor
walk you
means
through
whether
all
we
this.
Transparency is the name.
Right, that's up to
So
you
I think
three
we
to work
need
with the
to
attorney
address
once you
all
select
of
it.
our attorney when we hire rules.
Exactly. Okay, Mayor, you-
Right, I just want to clarify that, on August seventh, at our city council meeting, she was voted to, represent, Carlinville on this board.
okay. Thank you.
One more question.
That's never
We're a
disputed.
small water system in Dorchester. Have you yet set any fees or anything of any possible new members that might be interested?
No,
Okay,
there has been no fee structure set.
okay.
And that's really gonna be one of the next action items is once the group is defined,
Okay.
that really gives us the scope to be able to mold water demand around and then look at aquifer locations and those kind of things so that we can develop a full-fledged cost estimate to get back to the members and make sure that the project as crafted looks like it's gonna be economically viable.
We definitely have a strong interest. I'd like to be able to continue attending if that's allowed.
I mean, separately, Max or I could update you of where the group is at today. I mean, a study's been done, they have a ballpark idea of where the project sits, so if you want to.
Yeah, I apologize, we really didn't get into that at this meeting, but the genesis of this group is the result of a report commissioned by the city of Carlinville and funded by the USDA. And so the structure of that report, and there is a copy at Carlinville City Hall, is an analysis of the viability of a regional enterprise. And so it had the backing of USDA rural development in the format and structure of the report and things that they wanted to have looked at in terms of supply options as well as cost, anticipated, not only construction costs, but they wanted us to look at what the operational costs were anticipated to be. So there's a pretty thorough evaluation that you're more than welcome to look at, and it shows the maps. You see, on the front of the room here, there is a regional map that identifies the preliminary assets that the costs are based around. So it gives you kind of an idea of the scope that we're looking at today.
One last question. For the engineers, do you represent any of these people that are here tonight on the board?
As far as represent.
Are you under contract or you work for them?
That is correct.
Who do you work for?
I work for the city of Carlinville.
Okay, thank you.
I work for all three.
Thank you.
I just have one last question. What other entities, like Jerseyville is, the city of Jerseyville is still deciding, is that correct, whether they're gonna, what other like I know Carrollton was interested, I had a friend who came and said they had concerns after that. But what are the other entities that have shown interest, that are interested? Like you, obviously that,
You pretty much touched them all that I'm aware of today.
Okay.
This, that I would call serious interest.
all right, why, cause I've heard that there's several people interested, but I just wanted to see who it was.
We're Bunker Hill, and
Bunker Hill's interested.
we're definitely, yeah.
I even heard Brighton, they signed a contract with Illinois American.
It's all hearsay, though, you don't know.
Yeah,
I think
we
they're
don't-
waiting,
How
I
do
think
you
they're waiting
say,
for all this. to
we're
be
the only
hashed
ones
out,
that
then
have
they're gonna jump
committed
on.
to a financial input to this, or at least Fosterburg and Jersey County Rural has.
Yeah.
That's the only commitment in
You're the only
finances
two so far.
so far.
But when you, but when you look
Carlinville has.
at the reach of it, I mean, Bunker Hill's necessarily in because Fosterburg's in. There's a separate question that was asked
We-
earlier tonight.
we do
will they become
Royal
their own
Lakes.
board member?
I'm
We
sorry,
do
what?
Shipman.
What?
There was a separate question earlier, can some people become their own board member? So Bunker Hill meets that criteria. They may or may not stay as a satellite of Fosterburg long term.
Right, and I've heard
Medora,
another way
Shipman are satellites of
Bunker Hill
Jersey
might be
County Rural Water
looking
right
too,
now.
that's why yeah.
We're full support here.
You'll probably still remain a satellite most likely, unless you're gonna run the lines up there and hook it to yourself. I don't know if you're physically able to do that. So I don't know. But
Got a lot
your-
of talking
that's
to
the
do.
city-
all about
That's
economics.
the city of
That's right.
Bunker Hill's decision, not mine.
That's right.
It's
We're
all,
just trying to get this.
Mike, you got any
compliant.
comments,
Exactly.
not to put you on the spot? Still in kind of listening and learning mode? Okay, perfect.
We basically want to get some cheap water out there to everybody.
Cindy, you said you had a private email you were willing to share. Was that with anybody or just with the gentleman from Edgar County?
I asked my constituents on Facebook if they would like to know what my opinion was about why I am in favor of a regional water concept versus Litchfield. I asked if they would like to email me their email address to not have a Facebook debate. I sent that email to 3 individuals who asked me for my opinion on my personal Facebook page. I do have a copy of that if you would like to see it. It's purely my own opinion and the things that I see to be a benefit to Carlinville. And I did give it to my people that asked me on my private Facebook page. So you're welcome to have it if that's of interest.
I would like to have a copy of that,
I'd like
yes.
to have a copy of that too.
Do you have a website, go on the website,
An email?
Email.
Yes.
Do you have enough copies? Okay, thank you. You want that?
Just scan it.
Okay, I'll scan it out.
I'll get it from you, Matt.
Okay.
Any other discussion?
Thank you.
Move to adjourn?
I now move to adjourn.
I've heard that.
Did you second it? Oh, okay. All in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Meeting's over.
At the end,